Redditors who worked in retail, what has to be the most "are you serious" moment ever? Watched a man carrying 6 bottles of red wine simply drop all 6 bottles on the ground, shattering them, and walk out of the store. Cocky stained bright red like a savage business casual warlord. My assumption was that it was an accident and he was horribly embarrassed and just left. I'd like to believe that it was an intentional piece of performance art, because it was the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. I worked at a fast food place for a while and had this one regular who always had something to complain about. The worst was that no matter what, our fries were never fresh. Whenever we saw her, we dropped fresh fries just so she wouldn't complain about them. She'd order, and we'd give her fries directly from the fryer and she'd tell us they weren't fresh. What the fuck? My manager got them from her, walked to the back, and brought her the exact same container and apologized. The lady said these are perfect and went about her day. I worked at Walmart. A woman came in to return a bag of soil because the bag was dirty. She was dead serious. So I used to work in H&M located on 5th Ave in Nick. So as you can imagine, we would get assholes from all over the world. One day I hear over our radio a frantic call for the porter to come to the ladies' fitting room. Turns out a woman decided to take a sh*t in the fitting room and use some shirts to wipe herself. The real "are you serious" moment was that she continued shopping through the store casually. I worked at Sears and watched this guy with big brass balls walk in, wave, pick up a TV, we had overstock ice spider wraps out on the floor, and walk back out. Alarm didn't even go off. I hear "excuse me?" and look up from stocking the milk, which I'm standing in front of. "Could you tell me where your milk is?" Double quote. I almost didn't answer her. Milk is basically the whole aisle and I had it in my hands. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16-17. My first day. In the grill area training during lunch rush, this guy comes in through drive-thru and orders 100 burgers. 50 plain. 50 with cheese. I was like, WTF man? I was told it was a lunch truck guy that would order them. At the time we had a 49-cent burger and 59-cent cheeseburger day, then dress them out and sell them for like $2 to $3 a piece to his customers. Guy walks into Tractor Supply, steals bolt cutters off of the shelf, then walks to the side door and cuts the lock where 2 of his buddies have been placing items near the door. They pile everything in this tiny car and just drive off. They were caught later that day for trying to steal for another store in the same plaza. I didn't work there but was behind this woman in line at my tiny town's dollar store type place. She was buying a couple cans of that milk supplement for kittens. Thought it was actual cat milk and was buying it to drink herself in some sort of fancy food party for one she was throwing for herself. Yeah. I done went to Kroger's and got me some fancy cheese and shit. I had to leave the line because I was on the verge of bursting into laughter at the look on the cashier's face. I work overnight stock at Walmart. One night, I'm overstocking the spam section, and this big guy walks up. Big. I'm talking 300-400 pounds big. I continue minding my own business, putting things on the shelves, and he speaks. "Excuse me, sir. I am so sorry that you have to see this." And then he just pauses, confused and concerned on equal levels. I stand up and turn around to look at him, wondering what exactly he plans on doing. After staring at me for about a good 20 seconds, no exaggeration, he reaches over and grabs a ton of spam. More containers of spam than I ever thought anybody should ever need in their lifetime. Let alone one shopping trip. That one is an exaggeration. Sue me. Close bracket. With his cart fully loaded with spam, he turns around and walks away, leaving a huge empty spot on the shelves that I'd been filling up. I managed to get out a quick "have a nice day" before he escaped around the corner. It was certainly an experience. Definitely the time when I was moaned at by a customer for not being on a very obviously unmanned checkout despite there being a very obvious long line because I was very obviously on the phone for an ambulance for a customer who had very obviously collapsed and was now very obviously bleeding to death. A guy came in who I have never encountered in my life. Served him and all was well. 3 hours after my shift, a notification pops up on my phone. This guy had found my Instagram and my Snapchat and added me. What's creepy is the only thing he knew about me was my first name. That was it. Also, I only recently moved to the area and know nobody here. Creeped me out for sure. Worked at a Target and have literally 1,000 stories. But the one that sticks out to me was one I wasn't actually present for. Gentleman walked in one day with a blender. Sat down in our Starbucks and proceeded to make himself a smoothie. I can't emphasize enough that this is retail. This is hardly the weirdest thing that's ever happened to us. The floor leader on duty asks if he needs anything. Is looking for anything. He smiles and says no. Thank you. Very polite. When he's finished, he takes the blender, goes into the bathroom, and proceeds to pour the smoothie onto his head and begin to shave. In a Target bathroom, which admittedly are already a little akin to the Twilight Zone. The Australia on the world map of Target, if you will. Anyway, a male employee was sent in to ask what exactly he was doing. And apparently, the man replied with what? It's not like I'm doing anything illegal. What are you going to do? Call the cops? Double quote. Yes. Apparently. I guess several other male employees were called up to guard the door before anyone else could get in before police arrived. Don't know exactly what happened to the guy, but I'm glad he's getting use out of his blender. You'd be surprised how many women would rather slip a raw steak into their purse's pants than pay whatever sale price they are going for. And this is in the upscale supermarket as well. I work in a butcher shop. Today a lady came in looking for lean turkey mince as she was on a new diet. She said her daughter made up a diet plan and is weighing her every day. I asked her how is she finding it so far and she said it's really tough. This is going to be the first thing I've eaten in 2 days. Fuck her daughter. Woman bought a shed. I asked her loading bay number and she said she hadn't driven. Asked her if she needed the number of a man with a van or something. She said her husband could carry it. I stared at her and said very slowly, madam, it is a building. Double quote. She insisted that I was being ridiculous and demanded we bring it up so her middle-aged, slightly chubby husband could carry it out the store as they only lived about 10 minutes walk away. We brought it up with extreme difficulty and she asked me what's that thing? I said that's your shed, madam. There's no way Jeff is carrying that. Double quote. Oddly she decided to pay the money to have it delivered. A lady asked me where are the eggs. She was literally looking at me and they were directly behind me. Obviously 2 shelves wide and with a sign hanging from the side of the shelf that said eggs. I worked at Suncoast, video retailer, during the early 2000s and some dude kept calling me for weeks asking me if the movie Churro Man had come out on DVD. He had a pretty thick Hispanic accent to his English. I considered myself a film buff and I had never heard of a movie called Churro Man. Every time he called I would look up Churro Man in the computer database and of course nothing would come out. I would ask him if he got the title wrong. Perhaps it was The Wicker Man and he was like, nah dude. It's Churro Man. I saw the commercial that it was coming out on DVD. It got to the point where I just thought the guy was f-king trolling me. One day the guy came into the store in person. He came up to the register and was like, you guys finally got it, huh? While holding up a DVD. It was True Romance. Are you f-king serious, bruh? Not really retail. But when I worked at Five Guys someone asked me if our french fries were made from real potatoes despite signs and 50-pound bags of potatoes being in front of her face. I was once berated over 10 minutes because of the fat content of ham. A lady was adamant that ham never had fat when I was a kid and wanted to know when they started adding all the fat into ham. I can't eat anything anymore, she must have said that like 15 times. I was like, Lady. They really only taught me how to slice it. Worked in a local fruit market as a teenager. Packed this lady's grocery bag and went to put it in her shopping trolley when she started screaming at me about what a horrible young girl I was and don't I have any compassion etc etc. Turns out she had her pet rabbit sitting at the bottom of the trolley, wrapped in a fur coat no less. I was trying to crush it to death by being nice and loading up her groceries for her. I ended up crying while the next lady in line consoled me. Open bracket. I grew up in a big city until I was 15 and we moved to a small town. I got a job at the grocery store which wasn't very busy. One day I'm working with one other teenage girl and a guy comes between our two lanes. Looks at the girl I'm working with and says no way I'm going to have a brown girl ring through my groceries. That was the first time I ever met a racist person. Never witnessed anything like this in the city. So it really boggled my mind. I told him I couldn't help him so he would have to go to a different store. And I left my till. I worked in a supermarket for about a year and a half. I've had some crackers. The best one, by far, was a man walking up to me and demanding I show him fruit. I asked him what specific kind of fruit, as they are stored in different parts of the store. And he just replied with fruit. So I take him to the part of the store where most of the fruit is kept and asked him if that was going to be okay. He then asked me for fruit in bags. I explained that he can put the fruit into the fruit bags to take to the till. He then decides that none of this fruit is the fruit he is looking for. After what felt like weeks of trying to coax what fruit he was looking for out of him. Walking him up and down the fruit and veg aisles. 3 different managers had to get involved after he started yelling at me because I didn't know where the fruit was. He cussed us all out and walked away. 20 minutes later he comes marching up to me. Shoves a bag of raisins in my face. Screams fruit and walks away. TLDR, guy spent about half an hour screaming fruit at various staff members. He was looking for raisins. I had a male customer come up behind me and start rubbing my shoulders. I had spoken to him earlier about products and he'd gone on about how much he liked my hair and did the creepy arm touch thing, so I'd moved on to other tasks and I was horrified when he followed me and put his hands on me. Not cool, man. As a cart boy. A guy throws his trash into a cart while he's standing right in front of a trash can. Worst part is when I went back to campus, college. I told my friend who was part of the janitorial staff. Instead of sympathy, he just shouted, "It's your job." I felt like dumping flour in the room he had to clean and saying, "What's the problem? It's your job." Double quote. I worked in a pharmacy that sold a body wash called goat soap. A customer approached me with a bottle of it and asked, "Can this be used on people too?" I was absolutely blindsided and had no clue what to say. I worked at a bakery counter in a grocery store. Lady asks me about a cake that has fresh raspberries on top. I tell her, it's a white cake, raspberry filling, and fresh raspberries. She thinks about it and then asks, "Does it taste like cherries?" Double quote. After looking at her and trying not to say anything rude for a good solid minute, I managed to say no. And I walked away into the back. Yesterday my manager spent half an hour trying to find an account customer's order in our system. You can do a reverse lookup in the system to reprint receipts. After she insisted she had come into our store earlier that day. There was nothing in our system. So he said he'd give her a call back when he found it. Spent some time looking through the tills for her receipt. Then on a whim called the other branch in our city. They confirmed that she had in fact shopped with them. And he had wasted all that time and effort. I used to work in a department store. Asking thinking "Are you serious?" was practically an everyday occurrence. These were our regulars. So the woman who would take a dump in the fitting rooms. She was banned but still kept coming in. So the boy who would hide in the women's footwear section and howl like a wolf every time somebody reached for a shoe, so the man, nicknamed Mr. Thursday due to his weekly visit, who would spend a fortune and then flirt incessantly with my female colleagues, all of whom were at least 30 years his junior. So the wannabe thief who would casually ask the security guard when he'd be out to lunch. Every single day. So the girl who would loiter by the fitting rooms, giving her brutally honest opinion of strangers trying on showing off clothes. So the man who would ask anyone and everyone for a white shirt, collar size 16, 5 only to buy one, come back the next day and ask again, and other rejected titles by Stieg Larsson. When several people yelled at me for ruining their kids' Christmas because we didn't have a certain item in stock, or even sell it. Like, I'm a f***ing cashier. I have shit all to do with what we sell. And if something we do sell is out of stock, am I supposed to snap my fingers and make it appear? No son. You ruined your kid's Christmas by not planning ahead and getting what you needed. Next time buy it up when you see it or order it online. Don't crawl up my ass about it. When I was demonstrating how to use a martingale collar for this lady, asked her to try it herself just so she'd understand, I used my hand. I was assuming that she was gonna do it on her own hand. She didn't even skip a beat, and tried it on my neck instead. Nobody even said a single f***ing word to me about it afterwards. We just exchanged really confused looks. And I just did the classic shoulder shrug I dunno move. And they just did the well that just happened glance back. I worked at Starbucks. A man came in. His hands and money covered in blood. I looked questioningly at the blood. Then swallowed my fear and disgust. And made the man a cup of coffee. He then went to my manager. Said I had treated him poorly. And demanded a coupon for a free drink next time. I was reprimanded by said manager for making the customer feel uncomfortable. One of my co-workers went outside and saw deer hanging out of the man's truck. Sigh. Edit. I am ambivalent about hunting. But I think expecting someone to have cleaned their hands is pretty reasonable. I worked at a hardware store as a cashier when I was 16. I mostly read books when nobody was in the store. When one lady came up to the counter and saw I was reading Catch-22. She then spends a good 5 minutes ruining the ending and telling me how bad the book was. She clearly didn't understand the satire at all. People who think that the food or toy donation box is a trash can. Dirty diapers and obviously dirty needles on the ground. One of my worst jobs. So many people leave perishable foods all over grocery store shelves. The worst was when the olive oil aisle started to smell funky. A week goes by and now the whole aisle really smells rancid. One of the managers was adamant about finding the phantom stink menace. He found it alright. Tucked way back behind the bottles was a salad that some fuckface decided they didn't want anymore and hid it. It had shrimp and tuna and berries and who knows what else in it because of the crazy mold growing on it. If you don't want something anymore, just put it back, you lazy shit. There are also garbage cans everywhere. This store will not charge you if you tell them you don't want it anymore at checkout. Drives me up a wall when people are this lazy and inconsiderate. Working as a cashier at the service desk of a grocery store. I answer most of the phone calls. Probably the strangest one was a woman who called and asked for the phone number to the store. The same store she has just called. I was a little dumbstruck for a moment, then just went ahead and relayed the number to her. Oh man. Worked at Eddie Bauer in the mall one summer. Working the floor. And had a guy come in asking where the regular khaki shorts were. Not the ones with 100 pockets. Double quote. I pointed him to the rack of regular khaki shorts next to the rack of cargo shorts. He thanks me and goes off to pick out his new shorts. He then comes up behind me and asks, you know why they make those shorts with all the pockets? Right? Double quote. Me. Humoring him. No. Why? Him. So the NRS in the cities can store all of their drugs in them. And they wear them baggy cause they stand on the street corners and jerk off. But you can't tell because they're so baggy. Double quote. Me. Oh. When I was dealing cards, I was talking to a regular one night. Sweet older lady. Came in pretty often and I always wiped her out. I hated to do it. But sometimes you just have a bad run of cards in blackjack and she always seemed to have a bad run of cards. She tells me she's trying to win enough money to buy her mother a headstone. This is after I had seen her lose hundreds of dollars at my table alone. At that moment I decided I needed to get the FCK out of the casino industry. This has happened a few times. A customer will ask me if we're out of something. Yes. I'm sorry, we are out of that right now. Apparently my answer, along with the shelf being empty, is not good enough. So they go to the next person they see and ask that person. That person then relays the question to me. Since it's my area after all. Yes. We are still out, is my reply. I used to work as a cashier in a grocery store in the inner city. I had purple hair. Too many creepy old men ask me if the carpet matched the drapes. What the FCK kind of question is that for a complete stranger? I worked at Target for almost 7 years. From my junior year of high school through college, yeah. I took a while to get my BA. The store I worked at changed store managers during my last year there. And one of the new guys' priorities was to get rid of all of the staff who had worked there for longer than a year. I got written up for being off task for saying good morning to a co-worker who had just returned from a trip to England. It was my first write-up, given to me by an assistant manager who I had previously had a great working relationship with until a new STL came in. I walked off the job that day. I'm still upset by it. Over a decade later. I loved working at Target. And I still hate that manager to this day. Luckily, he got fired under a year later for gross incompetence. It's amazing how many people get mad that you are trying to rip them off for taking the 10% sale off their whole bill instead of 10% off each item on their bill. Customers can be idiots. But we always bend over backwards to accommodate them. A woman came into the sporting goods store and asked for a manager. I came out. She held up a pair of dirty, worn out tennis shoes. I want to return these. They wore out too quickly. Double quote. Me. Laughing straight in her face. No. Just no. Double quote. I worked in a seasonal kiosk for Christmas selling decorations in a very upper middle class city. We had wireless terminals so we could cash people out all around the kiosk. I went to hand one customer the wireless debit machine and she pointed at it and said, "Ugh. Like. What is that?" "It's the debit machine, ma'am." "Oh. Ugh. Okay." And then she tried to pin her number in while I held it. I just put it on the table and turned away. Are you seriously going to act like you're too above holding the debit machine? You're in a f***ing mall. I worked at a restaurant equipment and supply place. Mostly dealt with owners operators but did get some non-trade customers. Had a guy come in and buy a 400-pound ice machine. Production day. I told him I could give him the name of an installer if he was interested and he snapped at me that he would handle it. Okay. No problem. He brings it back the next day pissed off at me because I didn't tell him he would need to hook it up to a water source. I work in insurance and just yesterday a gentleman was raising his voice at me over literally the silliest thing ever. You know how on debit machines there's usually a button to change languages? The machine was in English and had a Francais button. But when you press it, the language turns French and it then says English. He couldn't get past the fact that the language displayed on screen wasn't indicated by the name of the language on the bottom of the screen, that it was just a name for the button so people from the opposite language could switch it to the one they understood. He was literally raising his voice at me for a good 5 minutes over this. Asterisk. I was a manager of the electronics section at Target. One year I worked Black Friday. And at about 10 AM, I think we opened at 5 that year. This guy comes in and starts bitching at me for not having any big ticket items left. At first I thought he was messing with me. But then he goes off on how he drove over an hour to get here. Why don't we have any more items for sale? There must be some in the back. Etc. Not the craziest story, but I honestly couldn't believe someone could be this clueless. Had a woman come up to the counter with a bag of birdseed and a coupon that said, in big blue wording, that it was for a different size bag, different brand, and different kind of seed altogether. When I explained, She said that she didn't need that kind. She needed this kind. So I told her she couldn't use the coupon. She got so mad and we ended up giving her the discount anyway. I used to be an airport limo driver. Was waiting for a fare when this guy comes along. Put his luggage in the trunk. Got him in the car etc etc. I ask him, where are you headed to? He replies, none of your f***ing business. 10 minutes of driving aimlessly around downtown, he finally tells me which hotel he's staying at. I used to work for Apple. And people would try to get free stuff from us all the time. They would come in and complain about anything in order to try and get something for free. One night, just as we were closing up, a lady walked in, drunk, and started going off about how she was disappointed with her Apple product and wanted a free magic mouse and keyboard for her troubles. The closing manager was sent in to talk to her, and seeing that this lady wouldn't listen to reason or leave, he did the best thing I have ever seen. He said, "You want a magic mouse and keyboard? Fine." He then proceeded to grab them off the shelf and said, "Come on," leading her to the front door like a dog. Once she stepped outside, he closed the door and locked it, without giving her anything. It was amazing. I worked at an expressmen when I was around 16. The store was in a dead mall and rarely saw any customers. As a result, there wasn't a whole lot to do. My manager walked in one day to see me just pacing around the store with nothing to do. The place was spotless. Everything on my usual to-do list was done. So she went to the denim wall and pulled all the jeans down into a pile on the floor. She glared in my direction and said, "Maybe now you won't be so bored. Refold these. Lazy shit. You'll be broke the rest of your life with your work ethic." I smiled, placed my name tag on the counter and walked out. There was only one other floor worker on staff and he was in Jamaica on vacation. She is now a banker at my local credit union and to this day she won't look me in the eye when I come in to make a deposit. I easily make 10 times what she does.